So I presume we are already live, but we will wait until the scheduled time. But if you can check whether you can see us on Facebook,
I can see
and
us on YouTube.
it's fantastic. And I will now check whether we can see each other on Facebook. Looks like it we can. So that's really good.
But there's a big delay.
Yeah, but that's all right. It's just
Yeah.
life. All right, so we're on. We will now wait until the required time, and then we will start.
The reason I want to look on YouTube is because I kind of want to see if who is online. I can't see anyone at the moment. But I
Yeah.
don't know, maybe I'm looking at the wrong thing.
So my project here, and I will talk about it just a little bit. So the idea is to have these podcasts, but also each issue that we discuss, we will turn into a book chapter. So we will have, after a while, we will have a pretty good book with a lot of material from these discussions, and we'll publish it. And as we engage other scholars, and Andrew, is this your monster screaming? Is it a female dog or a male dog?
Unfortunately, yes, they're all females. All the animals in the house are female. And Smarty is, well, we're broadcasting from our house. Everybody's broadcasting from their house, so there's going to be some family noises in the background.
Okay. Well, once I return to Australia, I will broadcast from the studio, professional studio, but at this very moment, it is as it is. But one day, maybe we will meet in one place.
Oh.
You have? No.
Maybe we will. Maybe we will.
Yes.
Okay. So
actually, I
if you
discovered
could
that there's
turn off
another
your
university. Oh, can I say something? Or we haven't started.
Can you turn off your YouTubes and your Facebooks, please?
Why?
Well, at least the voice, because it
Voice
overloads the system. Yeah.
Voice.
Or at least
you can't send voice on YouTube.
No, but you can hear it, so you have double speak.
No, because I don't have headphones. I mean, everything's on headphones here.
All right, so we've got 1 minute. We've got 1 minute to begin. So some people will join us now, but Andrew is always making the most noises. It's his cars, his dogs, the motorcycles. All right, so it is now 2 o'clock. I will just, is any one of you on YouTube or Facebook to see if there's anyone there, or we can begin? Andrew, is anyone on Facebook or YouTube? Eventually, we will have increasingly more people. So let me begin the podcast now. That's it. That was the signal.
Let's go then.
Right on time. So my name is Ania Lian. Most of you probably watching this podcast will know me. I am a lecturer in Charles Darwin University. And as you can see here, we have a broadcast which relates to issues of teaching and learning of English. Obviously, a lot of issues we will discuss here are also relevant to other languages. But because most of us who will be meeting here are predominantly involved in the teaching of English. That's why we focused the topic of our discussions on English. So we plan to have these discussions every 2 weeks. We don't want to get too tired, too intense. It's not a political broadcast, so we don't have to know every second what's happening and respond to it. So today, I've invited to these broadcasts Professor Ania Lian, he's currently in Thailand, and also Dr. Lala Bumela Sudimantara from Indonesia. So on the description, on the title page of our broadcast, you can see the credentials of our guests. And today, I wanted to focus our discussion on the issue of curriculum planning. Now, I will not spend too much time introducing my speakers because a lot of information about the profession and about their focus and about their experiences will come from the discussions. So we will get right into it. Now, one more thing. Please comment, whether on Facebook or on YouTube. We do see your comments. As much as possible, we'll try to respond to them. And in the publications which will follow from these podcasts, we will include responses or even comments that you will post, because sometimes these help us expand our own understanding of the issues that we discuss. So, like a good schoolgirl or a researcher, hi Monashi, thank you for being here. So, like a good school teacher, I've got a PowerPoint. We have a PowerPoint solely for the purpose of guiding our discussion. We're not actually bound to this PowerPoint. And Lala, I know you prepared the PowerPoint, so when you want to refer to some slides, please ask me to put it on the screen and let me know which slide would you like to progress to.
All right.
So in 2018, Ania Lian and my former supervisor, Professor Roland Sussex, have written a book together. And there they looked into statistics, into proficiency levels of English in Southeast Asia, or especially, but also around the world. But Southeast Asia was their main concern. And they found that the news is not very good. Unless we're talking about the country like Singapore, the proficiency levels are low. Let us have a look. Right, so for example, I do a lot of research, say, with people in Cambodia. They are pretty low here on the scales, so they are number 94. Lala, where is Indonesia? Can you see? Are you
I think
looking?
Indonesia is it taken from 2019 or 20, I guess. Last
also,
year, we ranked the 80th, and in 2020 we
yeah, I
ranked
can't
the
see it here for
74th.
some reason.
Yeah.
Right. So, in any way, Andrew and Professor Roland Sussex concluded, as you could see here, that clearly there are some problems that need to be addressed. And obviously, many of us have done research, and also our students have done research pointing to some of those problems. Now, based on my own experience, and also because now we are just about to start either academic year or another semester, depending in which hemisphere you live. So in Australia, we're moving into semester 2 of this year, but in Indonesia, for example, you are just about to begin the new year. So I thought we will talk about curriculum planning.
By the way, before you say any more, the newest English proficiency scales showed Thailand not at 74 as it was in the item that you showed. It's now at 100 out of 112, so it's dropped even more over the last 4 years, which is
Right.
I mean, a problem for everybody, not just in Thailand, but in general. It's about English in the region.
What
That's
about
right.
Indonesia, Andrew? Did you
I
check
don't have
Indonesia?
it. I did, but I don't have it in front of me right now. I could look it up while you're talking if you like, and I'll
Right. So
let you
the
know.
general trend is, as you pointed out with Professor Sussex, is that news are no good, right? And we need to do some serious work. So we were hoping that if we have these discussions with colleagues, both from Anglo-Saxon countries, but also from our Southeast Asia colleagues, Southeast Asia, guests from Southeast Asian nations, maybe we will actually help the discipline and therefore ourselves as well to find some balance and maybe a direction that can drive to innovation. So, this is the schedule of our talk. We will first chat a little bit about why plan, then also maybe point to a driving problem in planning a curriculum. We will look at global perspectives. We will look at evidence that informs planning. We will discuss some examples. We may not have enough time. I think this podcast will not discuss too many examples. Maybe next podcast we will look at examples and find some patterns that will help us construct a curriculum, and then we will summarize. So, which one of you may wish to start first? The question is, why plan the curriculum? Notice that the question already presumes that I believe one has to plan, or obviously we plan. We just don't pop into the class and
Right.
have a coffee with students and do nothing, right? Whatever we do has some presumptions behind it. So why plan the curriculum? Maybe Lala, would you like to begin
Sure.
the discussion? Just take 3
Yes.
minutes.
All right. I think in Indonesian context, it is more relevant to plan the curriculum carefully because our country is suffering from a severe learning loss. In the last 10 years, we have dropped 64 points in English Proficiency Index. We also suffered a lot from the declining point in PISA, PIRLS, and TIMSS. So we have pretty much a lower literacy level, lower numeracy level, and also lower scientific level compared to the average number of OECD countries. And I think that's a very big problem for us at the moment. So now we are in the learning recovery context where the government is actually asking each of us to transform the educational institution. So we have to talk a little bit about we have to break away from the very traditional approach to English language teaching and literacy in general, because in the future, the low literacy level will be a big problem for a big country like us. And that's number one. And number two, the reason why you have to plan the curriculum is because we have to make learning irresistible. I have seen many evidence that lots of students are losing their passion for learning, and even some students say that they don't want to go back to school because of the pandemic, and then they don't want to go back to university because they think that they can make money without going to college and blah blah blah. So I think, yeah, as a person working in a university in Cirebon, I feel that kind of pressure is real. So I think that's the reason why we have to plan the curriculum. So in my experience, I have to formulate the problem in planning the curriculum because, as Einstein said long time ago, the formulation of a problem is far more often essential than its solution, which may be merely a matter of mathematical or experimental skill. So in planning the curriculum, we have to raise new questions, new possibilities to regard all problems from a new angle, requires creative imagination and marks the real advances in science. So I think that's the thing that I think we've done back in Australia when I was preparing for a syllabus with you both. So I think that's my first answer, Anya.
Okay, so to raise new questions. So what you're saying is you plan the curriculum in such a way so that the plan itself integrates some pedagogic innovation. Is it what you're
Right.
saying? So that
Yes,
you as a teacher
that's
can both learn from your ideas, you make sure that
yep,
the ideas are safe, but
yep,
intellectually safe, but you also want to learn how they play themselves out in practice.
right.
So you get feedback from students, you get feedback from your observations. That's great. And maybe feedback from other stakeholders that we might discuss later. Andrew, would you like to add something about planning? Just 3 minutes, 2 minutes.
Well, it seems to me that you're approaching the problem of curriculum from a from a general social perspective and a general policy perspective. And so what Lala is saying is that students don't want to go to school, to university. But that's a generalized trend. This is a kind of 21st century trend. People are starting to, partly because of COVID, but partly
Mm,
because of partly because of a general trend that university is no longer seen as very important. And one of
mm,
the difficulties, I think, is because we in society have tended to connect education with jobs. Uh, it's kind of interesting because actually education may have nothing to do with jobs. In other words, university is seen as a preparatory school for making an income. And people are saying, well, if it's not going to help me make an income, why should I go to university? And organizations like Google are now selecting people without degrees, without what we might call just in case learning, uh, in order to meet immediate needs of the organization of Google, for example, and um, in order to kind of grow an intellectual milieu which is independent of formal qualifications.
Can I interrupt you, Andrew? I think
Mhm.
that point will need to be a little bit more explored. I think that's something for you, Andrew, to actually give some thought to it, because if we were to follow, I suggest, if we were to follow the idea that universities don't necessarily need to prepare us for jobs, then maybe we have a structure and we used to have this structure of university programs in Australia, whereby university offered you opportunities to broaden your intellectual powers, whatever that means. And then you had an additional 1 year whereby you built on it, and then you became, for example, an English teacher, or you became a researcher or whatever. So, and I think America has, maybe, I don't know exactly, but you know better, America has this more diversified way of approaching your course, your program at university. So diversification maybe of programs might respond to it. Now, whether what intentions Google has We won't know unless
But
we actually explore.
yeah, but
They might be saying one thing and doing another.
Google's not important. What's important is that there's a trend,
Yes, there is.
which is kind of saying, oh well, we don't need that right now. You're smart. Come and talk to us for a while. You can work for us, and then you can change jobs when we're finished with you. And that's what's happening. Predictions are that people will change jobs at least 7 times in their professional lifetime. That was the old prediction. I think the prediction is going to be that people change their jobs even more. So, I think that these issues of universities are preparation machines, where you will get a good job. I mean, what's his name? Oh gosh, I've forgotten his name for the moment. Um,
May I ask
the,
you now? I mean,
yes,
I understand that people talk about people changing jobs every 7 years, and I think that for a lot of us, um, it does create anxiety of sorts. Although when we
sure.
go through life, we take these changes, and some of us with different feelings. But say, for example, what I am today, I'm not exactly what I trained myself for when I was doing my undergraduate. I was to be a German teacher.
Right,
But the training I was getting, so first I was getting a training of a German teacher, then a training of a German linguist. I
right.
don't anymore work as a German linguist. But my changes were not, the changes in profession were not caused directly by the environment changing, but by me changing, me growing, me.
Mm.
Um, not everyone can do these things, but say that. But I think that as a principle, I would say embracing what Lala was saying, innovation to expand yourself enables us to be stronger. And I think that's the point of our broadcasts, is to explore the avenues where each of us may find for ourselves, oh, that's my weakness. When I was a PhD student, I remember I knew that one of the avenues that I should explore to be really good was the discipline of communication. And I didn't want to touch it. I was hoping I would, what's the word in English? I would wing my way, like walk around it. And like a lot of our colleagues, for example, think they can wing their way without touching neuroscience, or they can wing their way without looking into cognitive sciences.
Well, it's not a
My
question of
point is,
winging your way. It's also a
my point,
question of ignoring it completely.
and in order to be stronger, I couldn't. I couldn't because then I had Lala, or I had the other person, Lukman Behagi from Indonesia, right? Who was asking, once he found out that he can ask me any questions, and the more the merrier, I was getting questions that were literally irritating me only because I had no answers, right? So I had to grow stronger, learn more and more, because sometimes we think we already have it or we don't. I might just move, Andrew, now to the next point so that we can progress it a little bit.
No, but can I
Yeah, please,
just
by
go
all
back
means.
to the Google thing? And it's not about changing jobs every 7 years. It's about changing jobs 7 times. So maybe, you know, people change for many reasons. And even I changed, as you know, uh, many times, surprisingly, according to the circumstances of life. What I'm saying is that life is different now from the times when our parents and I were sold the idea that you're a good boy, you go to school, you do well, you go to university, you do well, you get a degree, and then you're going to get a job for life where you're going to live in the same house forever, uh, and you will retire at the age of 65 with some money set aside, and everything will be good. It just doesn't work that way anymore. It's not just us as individuals. It's just society has now become much more dynamic, partly because of communication, partly because of technology, partly because of travel, and so on. So we are no longer riveted to our seats and our house and our university in the city in which we were born and grew up. I think this is a framework for talking about curriculum,
I
which
wanted
needs to
to
take account of that to some considerable part.
I also wanted to, yes, right, that's right. So we're planning in a way that is expansive rather than reductionist.
Right.
It's not about, I mean, I'm running ahead of our discussion, but it's not about here's your drills and you'll be good to go for the rest of your life.
Right.
Right. So this is going to come up in our discussion. And I think, and the other point is so here's your drills and you're good to go is going away. That's how it used to be in the 50s and maybe a bit later on, and maybe even recently in Indonesia. So that's for Lala to point out. I think from
Yeah.
his thesis, I know that that's how it was.
In Asia, it continues to a large extent,
Right.
but it's going to
And
change.
right. So the other point that Lala, and that was your point, but the other point that I think that Lala was making is leveraging between disciplines, right? So the English
Right.
and Bahasa curriculum planners can actually get together. They have things in common, maybe even mathematics people, right? So it's important that people talk to each other because some of them might be actually lucky to have met colleagues that expanded their understandings, gave them something. So the more we talk, the more we can learn. But leveraging, especially on disciplines which are so close intellectually, like English and Bahasa. So I wanted to refer to, in order to prepare, so this is something when you prepare broadcasts like this one, for example, you very quickly learn that you actually have to prepare. You have to do your literature review. And one
Yeah, we
way for
did.
me, that's it. One way for me was to actually explore the doctoral thesis of my students or ex-students, because there was a lot of good things. PhDs often contain a lot of pearls that we might use. So Hanum, we call Widya Hanum Pertiwi from Indonesia, we call her Hanum. She calls herself Hanum. So Hanum wrote this thesis and she explored a book, a very difficult book, I would say. I don't want to put off anyone from reading the book, but sometimes as a supervisor, when I check students' work, I actually, in order to see whether the literature review is actually giving justice to the authors, I need to reread papers. So I found the book quite dense, but Hanum found this very nice framework for planning the curriculum. And what Alan Edwards and Biesta were saying, that curriculum should, when you write the curriculum, should consider the following aspects. And I think Andrew was actually touching on them, which is critical analysis, critical perspective, political perspective, and generative perspective. Critical basically means identifying for yourself, and then maybe in writing, you can write a paper on how you planned your curriculum. So explore approaches to curriculum. We already have done it. Here's your drills, you're good to go until you retire. Or um, he, here's a framework enabling you to become a lifelong learner. And the entire curriculum for this particular subject was constructed with that objective. Now, I can see a lot of people going like, oh my God, what does it mean? Yes. So that's critically analyzing issues, problems, educational theorization. So you put some things on the table or some approaches, and you are aware of the differences, why they were formed, what evidence they considered, right, and what's the relevance of this evidence when compared with each other, right? So when we had those drills in the 50s, are we gonna throw the baby with the bath water? Or maybe there is something to it, but what's in it for us? Oh, drills are good on the side. Well, that is not good enough. So these are the sort of thoughts you need to go through. And that's the knowledge you have to have, so that when someone dares to ask you a question, we're very nice intellectuals. Scholars are very nice. We never ask pinchy questions because we don't want to be nasty. But pinchy questions are not about being nasty. It's about me learning about my own question, right? So when I ask someone a question, it's not about me waiting for a person to answer. It's about me learning from that person what's the relevance of my question for myself. So critical perspective approaches and how they compare against each other in relation to the evidence on which they were formed. Political, how these different approaches were a response to what Angel was talking about, these social development strategies. What is it that the country was standing for? Right? So what did the policy say? So I'm sure that today we will talk about the ASEAN nations having their blueprints, educational blueprints, right, which set out the direction that all ASEAN nations agreed to. I am not saying that these directions you have to agree with, but you need to know what you argue against, right? So that perspective is important to embrace, either for critique or for exploring your own capacity to address it. And then generative perspective, which is, all right, you're so good, you know your evidence, you know that particular thing you have in mind is really good, it responds to the political pressures and social development visions. Can you turn it into something that other people and you yourself can now repeat and repeat and repeat, so it can be actually turned into practice, right? New forms of practice. So these are the perspectives that Hanum dug out. Good on her. So, Lala, from your perspective, what do you think is the key problem in curriculum planning? Just one. Or I think of one. That's why I'm asking you to identify one. But maybe I'm a little bit limiting you, but just like 2 minutes response, if you don't mind.
Okay, I think it is very critical for us to relate to the policy of our country, right? So back in 2015, 20, and 22, our government has strengthened the idea of transformative pedagogy in the regulation. And it is also addressed in my thesis.
What do they mean by transformative? Or what do you mean by transformative? Do you have some sort of neat, clean-cut definition? We will raise it today but every time I think of it, I change my definition, although I mean the same. But, yeah.
So the regulation says that the transformative learning has the characteristics of being holistic, integrative, scientific, collaborative, and blah blah blah. And I think
why is it transformative? Why is it transformative? What does it transform?
The government wants to leverage the learning experiences of the students, right? So from the content-oriented one into more student-centered learning. So I think the transformation is a matter of shifting the experience, okay, from the teacher to the student. So it's a matter of enriching the student's experience. So, with the hope that they will have the best learning outcomes in the future. That's what I understand from the regulation made by the government. But the problem is we never actually have real discussions on how to put that regulation into being in our schools, in our university. So we tend to take it for granted again and again. So what happens in universities and schools is we actually still using the very same traditional pedagogic approach in learning, in language learning. So maybe that's because we lack, research capital in our country, and then we don't have an integrated mechanism, how to foster innovation in our school and university, and that's also a problem. So I think, yeah, transformation is a matter of enriching the students' experience so that they can have the best learning experience. And yeah,
I think you have a good definition on this slide. I really like. I think it's from this. I don't remember his name anymore. I remember his surname. It's a publication 2004, Elliot.
mm.
But I
Yeah,
can't remember his
Elliot, right?
Christian.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can't remember.
yeah, Elliot, right.
Do you remember his Christian name? I don't want to.
I'm not sure.
So the intention of these new standards is for learning to result in the transformation of how the students see the world in relation to themselves. So basically the idea is that the student expands, is that expansion
Right.
element. And
Yeah, there
I
are
think
lots of
that,
myths.
yeah, I just want to, I wanted to say something that, because as I was going through your thesis, and especially Wahid Nasruddin's thesis, which was a year earlier than yours. And I think this is what you were talking about, that, and I think Hanum's thesis also has shown similar problem, which is the expertise, the
Right.
scholarly expertise of lecturers in planning the curriculum. I think that I've got a quote from Wahid's thesis, or someone's, I think Wahid's thesis, where he says something like, "It." I might just put it in comments
Yep.
for everyone to say. And I think these were the sort of things that it was established that personal research played no role in the framing of the new syllabi. So what he meant by that was that when he um, interrogated lecturers and asked them, "What's your research about?" So the research was about the verbs, and the research was about vocabulary. The research was about everything other than how what interests me relates to the planning of my teaching.
Yep.
Right. So that's what was, and I think that's what you were referring to. Andrew, what do you think is the main? Thank you so much, Lala. What do you
No, no
think?
problem.
Did I interrupt you, Lala?
No, no.
Okay. So, Andrew, what do you think is an issue in
Sweetie.
the key problem in planning the curriculum? Would you agree? Would you like to add something?
I think that in all countries, perhaps a little more in Asia, but in all countries, there is always, let's say, government interference. And government interference is what establishes everything to do with the curriculum, education, and so on. So, as an example, the Thai government had at one stage decided that it would run boot camps for teachers of English. A boot camp is going to be, hello, Anya's disappeared. A boot camp was going to be a place where teachers are brought together for an intensive period of learning English. And those boot camps were going to be run by the British Council.
Okay.
And nobody was asked any opinion about that. I mean, this was just a decision that the government made. So I wanted to say that, that's the first thing. Sometimes I wish Anya were back, but she's not back.
Actually, she's back soon.
Well, I hope so too, because this is going to be what I think that what I'm going to say is going to be of some value. But anyway, so, okay, are you back, Anya? Are you
I
back?
was. Just my mom has come out from the bedroom, and I had to explain to her what I was doing.
Okay. All right. So what I wanted to say is that there is. I don't know if you heard any of what I said, but what I said is that
I heard everything. Yes.
all right. So the Thai government decided on the basis of somebody's advice to the minister or prime minister or somebody like that, decided how they would fix the problems of learning English in Thailand. Nobody with any kind of expertise was consulted as far as I'm aware. And Anya, you've lost your visual background.
That's all right.
So, and this is paradoxical because we have a lot of people who are supposed to be experts in English and teaching and all sorts of things. But actually, nobody listens to anybody with any expertise. This is not new. And it's not limited to Thailand or Indonesia or whatever. It happens like that in every country that I know. Government tends to be suspicious of expertise in universities, and universities themselves tend to be suspicious of themselves. So if they need an expert in communication, rather than going to the communication department in the university, they go to an outside company.
Mm.
It's quite fascinating to see how consistent that attitude is. So that's the first point I wanted to make. There is suspicion, and there is by people in power with the university system. Secondly, so they never get consulted. Now maybe it's partly the university's fault because they don't agree on anything. So that could be part of the problem. But agreement doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or correct. Agreement is usually a compromise. So we compromise on this bit of quality, we compromise on that bit of quality. We don't have any principles. In the end, if everything is run by committees, you finish up with compromises about everything, and so you have a soup of inconsistencies.
I
And I
think if
remember
I
this very
can,
clearly when I was sorry.
you go on. I wrote the note for myself.
Okay. So that was the first point. The second point is that there is an official definition of chaos. Governments and organizations in general don't want chaos. They dislike what they consider to be chaos. Chaos is the opposite of order. Order is everybody in grade 1 must be between the ages of 6 and 7. Everybody in grade 2 must be between the ages of such and such and such and such. Everybody in grade X must have the following skills and competencies. And so what they finish up doing is trying very hard to create homogeneity, where homogeneity is clearly impossible to guarantee. Now, there are ways of dealing with that, which is to have groups which change in population, to have different curricular structures and so on. But nobody likes that because it's chaotic, or it seems chaotic. We are not sitting in rows being good little boys and girls. And academics who are outliers, by the way, are also chaotic. They're not good boys and girls. Because we sit out there. We're not doing what everybody else agrees is the way to do things. And
Okay,
here's
so
and the reason, sorry, wait a minute. And the reason I say this is because the word agreement is a word which is used in PhD theses to justify an approach or a way of doing things.
that's the
Everybody
problem.
agrees that Krashen is like this and like that. So we all clap and we go the Krashen way. Well, maybe not. Maybe we shouldn't. And so on.
So I think that 2 points. I think so. We have from this discussion, from on this point so far, we have 2 points, which is experience and scholarship in curriculum, which is what Lala was referring to, and what Andrew is saying, even if you had it, or to have it, you have to be given the right to exercise your agency in order to innovate, rather than being told from above, as if the words from above were clear, straightforward, and transparent. We all know what is critical thinking. How many volumes have been written what's critical thinking, at least in our field, right? And so even if the government wants our students to be critical, neither them nor we have come up with an agreement. So then we basically create reductionist concepts so that the government is happy with whatever they saw on paper, and nothing real happens in practice because our teacher or our lecturer was not empowered to innovate, to explore, to bring something new, which is the innovation thing that Lala, relating to planning the curriculum, was saying. What's important is to not just embrace the critical, the political, and the generative perspective, but do so with the view to the future, to innovate, to explore, to grow. So lifelong learner is not just the student, but also the teacher. So teacher agency. I think that we had that problem even more visible in Lukman's thesis. He's now finishing in his PhD, and he had the problem that something was, at least the policies were interpreted by by his colleagues in such a way that a particular approach is mandated by the government. I would like to see these government people demonstrate what they mean by that, and then also evaluate the relevance of what they say in relation to whatever else they say. Now, I want to actually be a little bit selfish now and
Now,
show you some.
before you become selfish, let me make one comment,
Yeah,
which is that paradoxically, while everybody appears to be disempowered by government and policies and so on and so forth,
they never comply in any event.
paradoxically, the responsibility is always the teachers.
Yeah.
And this is justified by saying about teachers that they are the experts and they are responsible for what happens in their classroom.
Well, that has come up in Nami Lore's PhD. And I looked in order to, I have to distrust my PhD students as much as I adore them and admire them. I had to look because what her respondents were saying. So, for example, especially the teachers, and what Nami was reading into it, was that on the one hand you have all these lovely policies, but on the other hand, in teacher professional standards, you are restricting us. We can't do any of that. There's one standard that says you've got to do these in particular drills, these particular lists, which is back to the 50s. Now, obviously, if the teacher is taught in such a way, like we are now supporting, which is expand your field of knowledge so you can defend your arguments, I am sure that the Department of Education could learn. But that's like 5 years of training that I'm talking about. So blaming people, right? So you identify something mysterious, and then you tell teacher it's their duty to comply, and then you do audit, you run the audit, and you say, well, I don't know what they say, but the point is, the finger is pointing at the teacher as the responsible one.
Well, yes and no, because government has developed a rhetoric which is, teachers are the key, teachers are wonderful, teachers are the ones who have to do who are the experts,
But they're restricted, is it what you're saying?
and they're restricted not necessarily by the government itself, but they're restricted by the fact that they're uneducated. And I mean this in the nicest possible way. I don't mean that they are stupid. I don't mean that they don't know things. But here's a good example. When COVID struck in our university and many universities around the world, people were told you must go online and you must do it in the next 2 weeks. And instead of hiring experts, assuming that there are experts, that's a different story. Instead of going to people with experience in doing online teaching, they were just told, just go ahead and do it. And
all
so,
over the world, in
all over
schools
the world,
and in
all over the world,
universities.
all over the world, in schools and in universities. And they were told, you are the experts. But they weren't the experts. Or they were made to feel that they had to be the experts, even if they weren't. And so there's a policy issue about the position of teachers in the or the place of teachers in the system. On the one hand, you want teachers to feel empowered to do things, but on the other hand, you don't want them to do things that maybe don't work, or
But
that
how are we
could be
gonna
done,
know?
or that could be done better, or that
Right.
could have help given to them in order to achieve. It didn't happen. They were just told basically, well, you guys are the experts. Oh, well, okay, COVID has come. Now you have to do it online. But don't worry, you're the experts. Just go ahead and do it. And so they did. And they did the best they could with what they had, but it wasn't, in many cases, it wasn't good enough. And
So,
it had a price, which is that it cost them in terms of their reputation, but it also cost them in terms of their sanity. It placed a huge amount of stress on them in a very short amount of time, and they finished up not being very happy. Now, as a result of that, a lot of people suddenly discovered that it was possible to teach online, and so the revolution that we've been trying to make in universities for the last 30 years, which is to get people to technologize a little bit, happened over the period of 2 years because of COVID. So yes, suddenly everybody realized, oh yeah, we can do this, we can do this.
right, but it has its problems too. So I actually looked into the literature, and just looking at the point of the problem in curriculum planning. So, for example, I looked here. What do we have? What date is this paper? 2015. So the concepts, the learning outcomes in terms of competencies, student competencies, had been already there in Indonesia by 2015, but it's an early paper just the same. So I looked at some data that this paper reports. So you have a reference here. And my question, obviously, I will not discuss this paper in detail or anything. My question really was, this is observers' notes, right? I wanted to know the criteria in relation to which what was seen as relevant enough to report. Students express their point of view. Well, I ran a professional development program. I won a grant, Australia Awards grant, and we had with colleagues from Royal University of Phnom Penh, and my colleagues from Phnom Penh were very good at discussion, really good. They took the beans and the meat and some noodles. 5 p.m. they went to one place and they all sat together, ate the noodles with beans and whatever meat they bought and whatever. And next day, till midnight, they could do it. Next day, they came to the seminar. I asked them for the product because they were supposed to produce a learning resource. They had nothing. 2 days on, right? So discussions are great, but they sometimes lead nowhere. So I will not spend too much time on this, but basically, the article had no criteria but would legitimize those observers' notes. A lot happens in classroom. Why focus on these things? You need justification. If you plan the curriculum, you have to have, as we mentioned, no, you don't have to have, but smart people identified those perspectives, which is the critical, political, and the generative, and none of that was present. Maybe a little bit of a generative, but not generative like, oh, this is what I did. It wasn't there, but let's assume it was there. I don't remember now. This is what I do. It's not necessarily relevant. This is why I do this in relation to other choices I had, and how these choices and the evidence I considered linked or challenge current social and political policies. Well, that would have been relevant, and we would have skewed the criteria for observation. But here it's just like, I have no idea why those notes. What do they tell us? And actually, they're circular. Now, there's another paper. I think it was published. It was sent for publication in 2017. So the national higher education standards were in place. Already we had the transformative national curriculum for English in Indonesia, so all was good. But the key reference of the paper is the linguist. It's like as if there are no approaches to curriculum, there are no policies mentioned, and even if they are mentioned, they are not embedded in evidence on the basis of which choices for approach were made to comply or to challenge the policy. So you can all read this article, but yes, basically the paper is based on linguistics, and the first reference and the references that you find there are linguistics. I wonder what I have next. Well, this is another one. I teach English literacy. So I teach future teachers how to go to schools and teach actually English literacy to children in Australian schools. So I look into what has been done in the past. For example, I look into Mary Calantzis and Cope book, which today had its latest edition. I think it's 2016, but 2012 my students had a copy, online copy, so I referred to that page here. Oh yeah, we have tables and pages for both editions. Anyway, the book argues that this particular text is a scientific report. So the key problem in planning the curriculum, again, are our assumptions. In this particular text, we see a description of whales. Whales are this, whales are that, whales are this, whales are that. And we know that science report is a response to a problem. There is no problem mentioned here. So you can see that things go haywire, not just in Indonesia, Vietnam, or I don't know, whatever country you can come up with. In Australia, when we get too one-sided, too narrow-minded, and we might actually get carried on with particular person's assumptions without actually ourselves asking questions. What's a scientific report? Go online and have a look what scientific report looks like. It usually says, well, for example, an adult scientific report, there is a problem, children are not eating in Australia. What will we do? Well, we conducted a science examination to find out how we can actually enable children to have access to food so that they don't fall asleep tired in classrooms. So with a scientific report on metabolism, on hours of when feeding should happen so that the children are not too tired from eating either, right? So we did this and this and this, and we found out this and this, right? That's a scientific report, a response to a problem that came out from life, from theory or from life. Well, there's no problem here. So you can see that we can really do the drills, do the 1950s pedagogy, even if we dress it in transformative vocabulary, when that dressing is not critically examined against the critical perspective, the political perspective or socio-political perspective, and also what innovation should follow. We too fall into our own traps of the past. right? At best, this particular text that this teacher was teaching is an encyclopedic entry, right? It has nothing to do with the report. So that's what I wanted to indicate to you, in my view. So global perspectives. So we've mentioned a few, right? We mentioned changes. Andrew and Lala are right in the ASEAN nations, are located in those ASEAN nations, universities, and know exactly what has happened. The ASEAN has been formed and generated policies in order to what? To assist countries within the Southeast Asia region to actually. Lala, would you like to continue? So global perspectives, what would you mention on this issue?
All right,
What,
let me see my
what is
slide.
the global context?
So I think in global context, we have
I'll
to
see whether
help
you have
out.
something in your PowerPoint.
Yeah, in the global context, I think as educators, we have to help our students to develop their capacity to be informed, to be open-minded, and of course, be responsible people and who are responsive to diverse perspectives. I think we are now in a very challenging global society where we've seen so many problems around the world, and the problems are getting more and more complex. And of course, it requires a very complex strategizing approach. So we need to have an education where our learners can actually diversify their perspective from time to time. So it will be, I think, a great opportunity for anyone learning in today's century, I mean, in this century, to have that kind of perspective. But again and again, experience and scholarship of the professors, of the lecturers and teachers, and also the policy should not restrict us to address that kind of thing. And yeah.
Right. And I think that what Wahid's thesis has shown, that scholars were very aware that they were lacking experience and practice. And I have to say that in Australia, we've undergone a pretty good training on how to work with those policies. But my research has shown that you need to still theorize them. And every policy person will say you still have to theorize them. And I think that we're not doing very well at that area, in that sort of area in Australia. I think that a lot of times in Australia, and I think worldwide, but especially in Australia, teachers and teacher educators started to criticize the policies. You mentioned a few here. So you mentioned your new national higher education standards. I will point also to your curriculum a little bit in Indonesia in my own slides. So we have policies, and they are transformative in the sense that they want a process to be utilized that enables the student to expand their understanding of the world and of themselves in it, right? So there's this reciprocal relationship between you and your contexts. Let me call it a plural. I think the plural is really important in those policies. So not just in your house and not just in your neighborhood, but that, yes, absolutely, but also go beyond, right? So you can create increasingly generalized understandings and also localized understandings. So we do have problems to the point that in Australia, we started to undermine those policies. And when I read the literature, and I have to admit that I wish I could read more about it, but some things are not yet published fully. But the things I read on assessments or evaluation of our curriculum were not theoretical. I mean, I understand that people were saying they were theoretical, but we will come back to that concept very shortly. And as a result, I'm afraid that some changes that I have already noticed in the Australian national curriculum for schools are basically based on emotion, not critical reassessment, which is that critical evidence that Alan Biesta and Edwards, I think these were the authors, were talking about critical evaluation based on evidence of what helps us do what. Andrew, would you like to talk a little bit about the global perspectives on the curriculum? The standards, the learning outcomes, maybe something from your past. I mean, you had been what would have today been considered a distinguished, amazing professor of English, of French at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, which is, like we have good student evaluations, but we also have, say, in Canada, they have extra evaluation whereby there are students are asked to identify one or two lectures that were life-changing for them. And I'm sure that the way you were teaching French, and I've seen it, were astonishing. So we had no policies, and yet you were doing things that help me understand the policies today, because I've seen what you were doing. And I know that people can read your papers, but it's just not the same, because sometimes people can read them and go like, it's not doable. So what would you like to say about global perspectives yourself?
I think, well, I don't have, I mean, sorry, your question raises several issues. One of them is the notion that there were actually policies in place to guide us when we were teaching. There were not.
So we're
There's
talking
nothing.
what years? What years?
Well,
The
every
80s,
year,
90s,
every
70s?
year, including now, there are
Okay.
no policies everywhere, anywhere, which actually percolate down to the classroom. There's nothing. There's nothing.
Classroom at university or classroom at school?
University, well, at university, because that's what I'm talking about.
I
That's
think
where
you
I.
do have standards in Thailand, don't you? Because you probably adhere to the
Well, we have.
international.
Yes, of course we do, and there are standards in Australia and so on, and there have been. I have been pursued by standard setting for the last 30 years. In every university that I've been in, they went through a standards review. The difficulty is that there is a distinction between the story you tell in documents and what you actually do in class. And I was thinking of Lala's slides, and I can't remember exactly what they said. One of them said, there's no need to, there's no need, something about the good old days. The good old days are very persistent. They seem to manage to survive despite policy changes. And so there may be policy changes, and people write documents and stories and books. And I remember at James Cook University, I think we had 10,000 pages of policy or something, a very large number. It may not have been 10,000, but it was certainly more than two, where about how we were going to become a better quality university. And I'm absolutely certain that none of this had any impact on anything that actually happened in the classroom. Teachers continued to teach the way they always had. And teachers tended to be fairly arrogant about the policies. Oh, it's just a bloody fad. It's just a story. Don't worry about it. Just keep doing your job. We are doing a great job. We know what works and what doesn't work, and so it's okay. We'll
But
just keep doing. We'll just
but to
keep doing
come
what we're
back,
doing.
to come back to this point, I mean, to reinforce this point, when we look at Mary Calancis's and Bill Cope's book on literacy teaching, and obviously it was adapted now in 2016 to America, but before it was written for Australia especially. I mean, that example with the whale text and calling it a scientific report, it's kind of like the old good days. I call it this way, you learn it, it's a scientific report and so on. there's something missing there. There's something missing there where that maybe global perspective, when integrated, but more critically, but more, would have provided maybe the authors with the question that would challenge their understanding of the genre. Because that's how I did that. I didn't do it as a linguist. Oh, I think this is descriptive, therefore it's Wikipedia sort of encyclopedic entry. I didn't do that. I did something else that I think I will show here with my slides. That made me see that this was the old good days. Scientific report. Teacher stands in front of children and does the drill. This is how you do it. This is how transformative it is when it's imposed from above.
Well, but that's the issue. People are invested with expertise, and they tell you how to do it.
So before, when we were talking about the problem with curriculum planning, we were looking at teacher agency, where we felt that teachers were disempowered. I mean, Wahid's thesis, I'm pretty sure, reflected one point, or the findings showed one point. Teachers or lecturers at university, were afraid to ask questions that would stimulate their thinking and maybe help them progress in planning their curricula better. They were afraid. What about if I ask the wrong question?
Right.
Someone will hit me.
Right. Well, that's at university. That's at university level, but in high school level, I think the situation, different countries is very different. In America, everybody's an expert.
Well, I don't know.
Everybody's an expert, sort of.
Yeah.
It's everybody's an expert when it suits the administration to make you an expert.
Well, but we did see examples when academics were thrown out from university because of fake accusations. But I wanted to say
it's a different story.
Still same context. But say, Lala, when talking about the problem in curriculum planning, we looked at teacher agency, and there are books, like, for example, you can Google teacher agency in Biesta and you will find his book, but I'm sure there's more written on teacher agency. Whether right or wrong, I think it's interesting to read. But now we're talking about student agency, which is, here is your drill on doing scientific report. Accept it without the challenge, because I just gave you, with my authority, the skeleton of it. Now all you have to do is replicate. And I will test it. And I'll make sure that you have all these bits that I identified as important without you having any say. That you actually show them on your exam, right? I mean, that's the message underneath. And we need to be very careful. And I'm sure that all of us make mistakes in our classroom practice. But if these mistakes are honest, when we did check the compared approaches, when we check the evidence on the basis of that underlie those approaches, that we link these to policies, maybe these mistakes would come out. And I'll show you how I did that to actually see the problem with Mary's example. But when we don't actually do this legwork, we're going to go to school, we're going to teach future teachers the metrics of scientific report the way it was done. And even if a little bugger sitting there somewhere in the corner thinks differently, it's irrelevant. They won't ask question. Even if they ask question, the teacher will say, well, that's good too. But what about identifying the key element of a scientific report? What is it? Why write anything if there is no problem? If nobody is asking for it, why write it? So there's no intrinsic motivation. And then, of course, we have the problem that Lala was talking about, which is students don't have motivation to study. Well, yeah. I mean, if the report doesn't come out from the students' interaction with the world, but from the teachers saying, this is how you do it, this is how you do it, this is how you do it on the test. Well, yeah, well, we will do it. We'll pass the exams. But it's not interesting anyway. So yeah, talking about the good old days and reproduction of those. Cambodia was also talking about the director of the English programs at the National Institute of Education. He wrote a book on that, a book chapter somewhere or an article exactly pointing to that too. The good old days that get replicated over and over. It's called the institutional culture.
Well, yes, but it's not institutional in the broad sense.
Okay, so should I be a little bit selfish and move to my own examples, and then you will
Yes,
maybe
I think we've also got to be a bit careful about time.
Yeah, right. So I wanted to show here, and things like the partnership for 21st century. I mean, our colleagues could look at where these competencies come from. They come from not necessarily papers, maybe intellectually explored. I don't know, but we're very often told that these 21st century competencies or skills come from interacting with different stakeholders in the society, and they collated these things. I'm sure that some research also informs this. I would have liked some of that research to be more visible. We have OECD paper also that informs our current global perspectives on how we plan our curricula. Now, this is Indonesia higher education standards. I made these two, I inserted these two arrows because I wanted to, we all know about these particular competencies, but I think that some of them are more important than others because they kind of like have a hierarchy. And I think that the hierarchy should have been actually embedded in that, in those standards, because at this very moment they look like a list, and they are what I think they are used, if at all, as a list. So someone will say, today I will do scientific research study. Tomorrow I will do showing independence and professionalism. Next day I will do right. So this is like you looking at at competencies as a list of independent items, but it isn't. In order to do one thing, you have to actually know the other things. And I think that's so good about these OECD outcomes, that they actually do have hierarchy, but still a little bit present competencies as separate. I think Australia has done a good job. Australia said, we want students to be critical participants in the Australian society. It's as plain as this, right? It's an overarching statement. We want our students to be critical, and this involves the following. So we're not interested in students being literate in English. We're not interested in students being numerate. We're not interested in students speaking French. We're interested in students using all these disciplinary knowledges or skills in order to participate critically in the Australian society. That's something, which means that when you learn these skills, you need to connect them to your life. And that was the point that OECD, I think, made in its report on learning outcomes, that unless we bridge what students learn with their lives, school is always that little jail outside of the community and students' lives. They can't relate to it. Now we're talking in abstract terms today. Another day we will show how it translates itself in practice. But today I just wanted to say that it is not about the outcomes and the people who generate those lists. They're not about treating them as a list of separate skills, but all of them serve to create critical participants or lifelong learners. Lifelong learners, critical participant is a person who continuously expands their knowledge and skill base, right? So that's why another synonym is the lifelong learner. So ASEAN countries made these policies now to integrate these lifelong learning skills, because what they noticed, otherwise they will perpetuate the agrarian economy in which they are currently stuck, or in a slave master economy where the Americans come, they say you do this, this, and this, and treat Indonesian or Vietnamese workers simply as tools, not as people that can contribute. So we have national curriculum in schools in Indonesia. And again, the ability to communicate, which means you don't communicate to your friend who sits next door at your desk. Well, that too. That's what's called collaborative learning, right? Being able to actually relate to other people and have teamwork. But you also have to talk to other stakeholders. Otherwise, you can't communicate. We had done a project in Thailand where 19-year-olds engaged with Maliwan Burapatana. That was, it was 20 years ago, way more than 22 years ago, actually, she did that, before the internet was the way that it is now. And the 19-year-olds didn't have to, but in order to connect with the community, they actually had to go to the community. And they said to the teacher, Maliwan herself, a 19-year-old cannot talk to a 60-year-old. It's just not on. So they had to learn how to break that social stigma. They had to learn how to introduce themselves, how to introduce the reason why they talk to them, all kinds of skills they had to learn, right? So this connection of learning for the purpose to actually be critical participant in the community generated a need for lots of skills that we can actually see here listed in those different. So here's Cambodia. Cambodia, just like Australia, is not talking about numeracy, communication, or something. They're actually talking about whatever skills they flagged here in these big circles. And clearly, they're not exhaustive, and everybody knows. But what they want is a full citizen. That's what matters. So if you plan an English curriculum and you say, well, today I'll just do the drills and tomorrow I'll do the full citizen, right? It's like, how do you know that the drills will generate the full citizen? Somehow the connection between what you do and the full citizen needs to be established by you, not by the student in their head, by you. I'm not saying it's easy. So Australia has all kinds of things. We've got general capabilities. I actually love them. I don't have time to talk about them. You can actually read them for yourselves. When you actually stop the video, you can look at cultural, ethical, personal, and social capability. They are all beautifully explained in Australian curriculum. Yet, in relation to disciplines that you teach, I think they need to be more theorized. So I don't have time to talk about this. Using evidence to plan. I will actually, because we're running out of time, I will a little bit run ahead of myself and just point to these things. All these authors are known to my guests. So I might just ask Lala and Andrew to make brief comments on evidence, that critical perspective. Why not do drills? Why do something else? But if you can actually keep it short, so that it gives me also a minute to talk about this slide. So Lala, in terms, maybe I will just exhaust it here because I talk about the Australian curriculum. So basically, critical and creative thinking is about enabling students to be exposed and demonstrate their capacity to engage in cognitive processes of analysis, synthesis, questioning. What else is that? I might just have a look at the previous slide to find out. So we have on the bottom synthesis, analysis, questioning, compare, contrast, gathering information, all of that. Right? So I looked at the evidence. Well, I looked at different lectures and papers, especially first exploring YouTube. And I was wondering myself, where am I going to get these cognitive processes from? And what evidence will I use to justify whatever I might translate into practice? I don't have the time to discuss it. That's another broadcast, another time. But look at this. I looked into neuroscience, the neurological theory of aesthetic experience, something that Lala knows a lot about. He was using this. Donald Hoffman, Andrew knows very well about him. I think Hanum was fascinated. I think that was one of the icebreakers between me and Hanum when she read Donald Hoffman. She couldn't believe it, what research was showing, right? So the idea was, from these papers, I learned about current neuroscience and psychological evidence about what perception is and how we organize the world. Notice I didn't say here, critical and creative. Vygotsky says Vygotsky was good, didn't produce enough empirical research because he happened to die at 27, right? People followed by after him, but that was the 1950s, 60s, and then we went on a particular trend which developed in the 90s. That's okay, but we are in 2022. We need to update our evidence so that the critical perspective for thinking about the curriculum needs to be updated. It's not a matter of your choice to choose an approach, because you might just love the drills. I mean, many people do. I've done the literature. My students have done the literature review, and I've read the papers too. Drills are still a really good thing. So, yes, so we will talk about these things later on. Personal and social capacity, it's about developing self-awareness and social awareness. And quite stunning is evidence coming from Antoni Damasio and Helene Mordino-Young, where they say, well, logic is great, everything is great, but underneath everything, because we are products of evolution, it's emotion that generates meaning, not words. It's experience, which is then emotionally categorized. Oh, you know what I mean, right? Then now you can put words to it. Happy, enchanted, whatever, right? So you have words, but you just saw the emotion, right? So they look into personal social capability, but they say, I think I could put here even Jordan Peterson as well, but Jack Panksepp says, rats play, but not to win. They play to be integrated into the society. So if you are a bully rat, because you're big and can win every game, you will be removed from the society, right? So play is good, but you need to know what's the stake. So again, emotion, right? You need to read emotionally your context. So that was really nice. So developing your personal and social capability. How does it feel how I act? How does it feel? Should I change my feeling? Ethical. Well, for ethical, which is about exploring your values in relation to other contexts than those familiar to you. As a result, you get a better understanding of your own values, and then you also learn that not everybody is a mirror of you or of your parents. Sad, but that's the truth. I mean, I wish everybody was like me. It's lonely. Right. And I accidentally stumbled on Douglas Hofstadter. I mean, I've read about him long time ago, but the context in which I was reading about him were boring. And then I found his video online, and it was mind-boggling. And he comes up with that analogy, the concept of analogy. This is more like me, and this is less like me. This is more like this, and this is less like that. And then we look for essences of these analogies, to the point we hierarchize them or structure analogies that we no longer know. We can't really know what's in our head, how they are organized. That's why he says, and then miraculously, these analogies become concepts, and I mean, these building blocks disappear, and you then have a concept of love. The concept of love but a 20-year-old has 5-year-old and a 60-year-old are different, right? So you still talk about concept is kind of like the word is the same, but what's underneath the building blocks are different. See how I look for evidence for that critical perspective, and so that it can inform more than what I had, say, from the communicative language teaching, from all the other approaches that that had been there before us. So I looked into social semiotics, and I have to say, I read a lot, but I felt that the other things were not as powerful and not as responding to the concept of student agency. But at the end of the day, student has to organize information. Otherwise, he or she regurgitates, doesn't understand anything, and we're not actually generating lifelong learners. Now, here, that concept of student-centered, or considering that the learner agency here, I think it really nicely links up with what Andrew was saying before, which is, how we like to put students into draws. Year 1, this group; year 2, this group; year 3, this group. And all of that. So student agency may not actually. I think I forgot my thread, but basically, we need to remember that whether teaching or testing, we can't bypass the student, because the student is the one who finally has to make the connection, create those analogies, right? and generate expansion, and organize things in such a way that they can actually demonstrate their capacities to be critical participants. So, Anne Friedman is a French semiotician, very powerful for me, right? That's me. And my students also integrate those references and others. So at least I have my references, and they all are modern. And my students can integrate those and myself and compare against other traditions and evidence that they had used. I think that we will drop today the example of the curriculum. I might put on in the comments a link of the curriculum that I created for my project in Cambodia. Susie, I will read your text in a second. Thank you for your comment. So to summarize, yes, I will leave a summary now for Lala and Andrew, and we will close the discussion, and then I will go to questions. Lala, we would like to summarize everything we've said so far. What are your ending or concluding thoughts?
All right, I'm going to say something.
Lala, your microphone.
Curriculum.
Yeah, and you can go first. Sorry.
No, our curriculum, of course, can be established in many different ways. It can be seen as a management tool by organizations, including governments, or it can be seen as something that is negotiated or even generated by the students themselves under the right conditions. So curriculum at best, curriculum is going to be a guiding phenomenon, which implies an organizational structure. I mean, if you're on your own and you want to learn something, you don't need a curriculum created by somebody else. You create it for yourself. So in that sense, it's not the same kind of curriculum that Ania and us have been talking about. So that was one of the general points I wanted to make. it can be negotiated in a variety of ways. However, in an organizational structure where you want to develop a country, where you think that education is going to be important, where perhaps you even think that it's valuable for job seeking and so on, then of course curriculum is really central. How that gets distilled into syllabus and other documents and practices, of course, is a different issue. But at least you get some general guidelines about some of the objectives that you want to achieve. And by the way, just for the record, competency-based curricula and so on are nothing new. I mean, it's like everything else in education at the moment. We are relabeling things, and we think they're new. Like, blended learning is new. No, blended learning is not new. Flipped classrooms are new. No, flipped classrooms are not new.
They're as old as the world.
Yes. And so that's right. They're as old as the world. Flipped classrooms, by the way, we used to call that in my day, we used to call it preparation. Right? Be prepared. Read chapters 3 and 4 of your book when you come, and we'll talk about it in class. Oh, really?
And nobody did, unless they had Harvard.
Well, that's another story. Yes. And nobody did. But it was called preparation. It wasn't called flipped learning because there was nothing to flip. Because there was no tradition of, we will do the real lecture in class and then you will go home and do your homework. And so occasionally the teacher said, no, we're not going to teach. Well, I'm not going to teach you this stuff. You just go home and do it on your own out of the book. Now they go home and do it out of the teacher talking on the video. Oh, well, that's very nice. But it's still called preparation. So, I mean, we have all of these concepts like translanguaging. Oh, we can now use the student's first language and any other linguistic resources they have available. Oh, isn't that new? Let's make a career out of it and earn a lot of money. Well, actually, no, it's been around for a long time, like thousands of years.
Yeah.
It was called translation, for example. And then the linguists of the 1970s came in and said, oh, you must only use monolingual dictionaries in the language that they are learning. So the poor kids had to buy French dictionaries to find the meaning of French words, which they couldn't understand anyway, because they couldn't understand any of the words in the French dictionary. All right. So I wanted to say that competency-based learning is as old as, at least in the late, in formal terms, at least as old as the 1980s. I know, because I was there doing syllabuses with competency-based stuff in it. So there you go.
I just wanted to, I might just post it. We have a comment from Susie, and Susie talks about flexible thinking patterns. I think that this is, okay, so I have to say that I do have my bias, whether it is bias of a scholar and teacher educator or whether it is just my nature. But I think that we spoke about it, and I think that flexible thinking patterns, I misspelled it really well. It looks awful. So flexible.
It's okay. Everybody knows you're a foreigner.
Yes, but it is on things. So, right. So I'll just correct it now.
Susie's very brave to be here.
Yeah, it's 3:00 in the morning. Susie, you are a hero. You've always been. So for me. So I just think it's a little bit. I think that it's nature of Susie. Susie likes leaving room for things to breathe. But I don't. I like to sort of have them contained because I want them to be distinguished from something else. And I think that flexible thinking patterns is maybe Susie, it's too early for you at night to actually or in the morning to actually expand it. I just can't grasp it what it means. But if I may actually come back to our, or refer us to our summarizing slide, I think we were talking about the kind of preparation that the teacher educator should provide, and then the teacher should engage, and might be personal views, never alone, right? I mean, I don't know how it is in Indonesia, but honestly, I would pay people money from schools to send me curricula or to meet together in workshops to actually establish units of work or establish curricula for a particular subject and so on. That doesn't happen. I think that schools and universities are really like the the marriage ends in divorce the moment the student graduates, and then to come back for a visit, it's really hard, and those visits are very short, almost like yes. So I think that what I wanted to say is that the preparation that the teacher should demonstrate in order to enable this kind of flexibility, divergence from standards, to follow student, to allow students to breathe. Divergence from standards. Standards don't actually restrain. Maybe, Susie, we will have a chat one day in our podcast with you if you are brave enough, and again, to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. But standards, something like enabling critical disposition, enable critical participation in the Australian society, they are not constraining in a sense like drills. But what they are saying is you must not utilize in your teaching a plan that somehow doesn't account in every class for that critical participation, for the ultimate goal of teaching, which is the critical participation in the Australian society, or ability to you know the same goal with different words is expressed throughout any of the modern curricula, say, that I know of, which is Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand. Things might be different in the States. In the States, they always have bun fights, and good or bad, I just don't have enough understanding of that. But I think that that vision and the standards are not reducible, and that's what we were saying, that there's a student agency and teacher agency involved. That the standards require the teacher growth and the student growth at the same time, rather than an imposition from above, which is something that Andrew was complaining above, and pardon me, before. Andrew was complaining about this imposition from above, while at the same time glorifying the teacher, saying, you know everything, but you must do these restrictive things. And this is what we find in literacy teaching in Indonesia, that some things are mandated, and maybe the way those policies are read by lecturers are restrictive, and I agree with you totally. But I think that policies, the way we read them in Southeast Asia, in that Southeast Asia region, which includes Australia, I don't find them, well, some of them are restrictive, but the way we do it in Australia, for example, is not restrictive. But we can, as teachers, make them restrictive. We can turn God into devil. We can turn anything into a drill, right? So, but that's why we have this critical perspective, explore approaches, identify the evidence on the basis of which they were constructed. What's the difference between them? How's the difference relating to the vision that informs our education policies? Can we now all of that turn into some classroom practice and test it and evaluate it and learn more from more evidence, or from this? I think myself, I invented a method, whatever method, 2014, I thought it was it, with students' questions, with examples of practice being tested in research. Honestly, I have moved so far from the 2014. I think the principles are still there, but the practice is, way better in my view. And now today, I think it's really good, blah, 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 ready like a bun to bake and give it to everybody. And I know that in 5 years' time, it will get better and better. So, but yes,
Maybe not.
Andrew, don't be negative.
No,
So,
I'm not being negative. I'm not being negative. I'm being realistic.
yeah, somewhere might be an end to it, right? Exactly.
Can,
Like
can
with
I
the
just
depression drugs, right? Depression drugs all of a sudden turn out that the drugs that they were giving people for youngs, against depression were actually not working or not working enough. Or the thing they were targeting is actually the wrong thing they were targeting. So there is a change.
That's right.
Lala, yeah,
Susie, you are brave. Thank you for being here.
she's my hero. She saw me in Toronto. She came to see me
She's,
all the way from the States.
she did. I think the key in your messages, I don't know if I'm right, and perhaps I shouldn't pick on it, but I will, is democratization of academic culture. Democratization of academic culture, it's not clear what it means to me, but if it means that anything goes, the answer, I think, is no. You can't democratize everything to the extent of saying, well, I have the right to say what I want, and therefore I'm right. No, you're not right. I mean, if your brain, if physiologically the body doesn't work in a particular way, the brain doesn't work in a particular way, you're not going to change it by your beliefs. So, and I'm not saying that you're saying that, but it's
But needs to be
interesting
said.
but it needs to be. Democratization does not mean anything goes. Democratization has to be based on evidence and on
Evaluation
logical
of,
logic.
yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, on evidence at least, and evidence, of course, relies on evaluation and assessment of that evidence. So it's not just opinion. I mean, my students often say things. I believe that Krashen was wrong. Okay, well, so what?
He may have been, but so what?
It
I
may
mean,
have been, it may be wrong. I mean, I think he probably was, but so what? Right? I mean, you have to explain why it was. And going back to what I said earlier, it's not enough to say most scholars agree that Krashen is right. Oh, really? So what? Just because you agree, most people, most Christians agree. Well, okay, not just Christians, but the reason I say Christians is because the consequences were bad. Most people agreed that the Earth was flat. So, does it make it flat? No, it doesn't. It's just a good story. And the reason I said Christians before is that the Inquisition used to punish people who disagreed with certain concepts, like the fact that the Earth rotated around the sun, as opposed to the sun rotating around the Earth. And so Copernicus and others found themselves in hot water because of their arguments, not their beliefs, but because of their arguments. But the church's beliefs were stronger because they were more politically powerful. And of course,
actually, evidence for that particular event or phenomenon, what circles what encircles what, was already produced 2,000 years ago simply by putting the stick in the ground and
yes,
checking
yes,
how what the way we what is it called in English, the dial time, where
it's
the sun
called
as
the
it
sundial. It's called the
sundial.
The
sundial.
sundial.
Yeah. So we knew it. I mean, we knew it. If someone explored it, that's why teacher education is so important, because we're looking for evidence. I posted something here. I might make it visible on video, but that's really selfish because it takes so much room. Teaching is a process. What evidence informed this? And how is this relating to the national and global vision underpinning educational policies? I think that's kind of the question that I think informs the curriculum construction. It makes it overwhelming. Possibly, we can't fix everything in this 1 hour or 1.5 hour podcast. But yeah, I think that's my little summary. Lala, what would you like to add?
Well, I just want to say that in my context, especially in the Indonesian context, um, if we examine curriculum without new ideas and perspectives, we tend to simply reinforce the familiar. So
Yeah, that's
yes,
point made in Cambodia
yeah,
too.
right. We have new curriculum, and then people say that this is the mandate from the government. There is nothing we can do. We will comply with everything that curriculum and blah blah blah. So I think it's dangerous when educators in schools and universities say that, because I think perspective means everything in curriculum. I mean, perspective is what is it? It means to see meaningful relationships from a range of points of views, and then I don't see that happening right now here. So it's gonna be a very tough and challenging job for anyone working in the scholarship of innovation. But I
I
think
think
yeah.
I think on this point, I just wanted to add to it. Can you keep the other point in mind, Lala? On this
Yeah.
point, I wanted to say, from what I have read, and maybe also Susie might actually agree with this or relate to this. I feel that a lot of discussion about curriculum planning now is constructed in such abstract terms,
Mm.
and also with the point of view somewhere underlying the papers that the teacher is always right. And what happens is that ultimately writing papers like this leaves teachers alone. So they have this burden of being right, which results in, burden of being right, often not no longer linked to university to check their beliefs through some professional development, that is directly informing their current teaching, not some abstract ideas, directly informing what they're doing now. Um, and what's needed, and what I hope through these podcasts to gain, is to offer teachers, whether at university or in schools, tools that actually can help them directly inform their practice.
Yeah.
So, as much as so today, we talked about how we even ourselves, as practicing teachers and teacher educators, how we ourselves construct curriculum, because all these things that we have listed today do not come just from our research, but also from our own practice. And in future, what I would like us to introduce and run past our beautiful audience, and I encourage everyone to send me comments either through YouTube underneath the video or Facebook underneath the live broadcast. Continue to do that. But I would like to have to result this podcast to result in some very helpful tools and practical examples of how to do it, to build that scholarship. And it could be as generic as or general as today, but it could be really nitty gritty, coming down to specific skills or specific little things that we're actually taking care of. Like, let me simplify it. Maybe, everybody in Asia is oriented towards speaking, reading, listening, and writing. And let me maybe embed it more like using skills in order to for impact, right? So for impact, for that, in order to participate critically in the global and local community, creating leverages between English and your national language, creating leverages between your understanding of the world and how your community works, right? Creating these links. So I hope that we can actually come up with eschew some tools, some models, some some helpful patterns that our audience could engage with, use them, criticize, discuss, and all of that. That's what I would like. Lala, did you want to make another point? Because I kind of interrupted you.
Just one more point. So I think in planning and designing the curriculum, the most challenging part is to actually replace the existing practices. I think in Indonesian context, it's really hard to move forward. When people are enjoying the very good old days, like the drill, the pedagogic grammar stuff, and blah blah blah. Well, I told them I think I was pretty good at doing grammar, but it doesn't help me a lot when I'm doing my IELTS or TOEFL stuff like that. And then when I was doing academic writing or making my English presentation, grammar didn't actually help me a lot in that case. So I think that's the most challenging part in my case. So yeah, it's really challenging for us educators to move forward. And I think
And make mistakes. And make mistakes. I think
that's
that's
right.
come up in Wahid Nasruddin's thesis. Dare to make
that's
a
right.
mistake and learn from it. Mistake is not, you're not going to lose your job. What you will do, if you can frame it and maybe produce a document justifying it, that will put in print, even just for yourself or for your colleagues, why you did what you did, then you can return to this print and evaluate it afterwards, right? So
Right.
honestly, it's not like I haven't made a mistake or Andrew hasn't made mistakes. It's like I remember Andrew when I was 30 I thought I was a great German teacher. Honestly, if you told me I wasn't, I would think that you have no idea what you're talking about. My students did everything I wanted them to do. Now, did that result in critical participants in the Australian society? That's a completely different issue. But I didn't know it then.
All right.
When you're 30, you have a big ego. When you're older, your life just strips the layers, right? Until you're just the best skeleton to front up in front of God and say, "Here I am, humble, miserable. Do whatever you want with me." I just feel so embarrassed. Yeah, but when I was 30, it was just great. Just ask me. So yeah, daring to introduce the change, right? Daring, being brave enough, informed change, not just change, right?
Yep.
I just do 3 more drills. Informed change. I think that's what kind of, if you could summarize our discussion with and integrate Susie's comment and Andrew's comment on Susie, not just anything, but an informed change.
But the issue is not a pedagogic issue. The issue is basically a management issue or a social issue. How, in a complex organization like a university, do you make change? Now, 30 years ago, 30? Yeah, maybe 30. 30 years ago, we were talking about introducing technology in the university system for language learning. People think we've done it today. Actually, we haven't. Nothing has changed fundamentally in the use of technology, except that people now can do drills online and can talk to each other using Zoom or Skype or something like that. But actually, nothing has changed. There is no pedagogic infrastructure that uses technology.
But you're saying this from the intellectual perspective, not from any other. You have done enough of research to have evidence to say that.
Yes, I'm talking about the intellectual perspective. However, from an everyday perspective, managers and administrators say, "Oh, look, we've given you 1 million computers. Of course we're using technology, and it's good."
Well, they have to say that because they have to get students to say that they're very good.
Well, but there are two perspectives. One is the managers. The managers don't know any better, and they should, but they don't. And so they feel happy that they have spent money for buying computers. But what happened with the computers is problematic, and became very clear. For example, very clear when COVID struck, when suddenly nobody knew what to do because they hadn't had any, let's say, training. I don't like the word training. They hadn't had any thinking about how to use computers in language education.
Right, but one of the things that I have mentioned, but I don't know whether I ever published this thing. It was, I think, a proposal for a grant or something. But again, interaction with experts is not. It's not. Lala one day will talk about his project, right, and also Lukman, my other student, doctoral student. But for some reason, this idea that you as a teacher or lecturer are responsible for your classroom, you know everything. What it does, it narrows the mind of the teacher. I mean, there were moments, and many of them, when Lala was actually using me to teach his classes. Right? What was wrong with that? What about integrating the international expertise? Your former PhD supervisors, people from Asia call when it comes to technology, in contacting people, asking for help. One doesn't even need to make a drastic change in their teaching, but a small change. So these
Okay.
collaborations
And the
are important.
other thing I wanted to do, and it's not on the same topic, but we're getting close to having to close down. I just did a quick survey of the EF proficiency ratings for the
Can you show your
last.
screen? Do you want to show your screen?
It's not on my screen. It's on a piece of
Okay.
paper. I'm using old technology. Now, some countries have stayed pretty stable, like Singapore. It was 5, 3, 5, 10, and 4 in terms of their rating in the world. But Thailand, for example, in 2017 was 53, then 64, then 74, then 89, and now 100.
Are they consistent too?
Yes, it's increased consistently every year. Singapore was stable. Philippines is actually also pretty stable. But Thailand increased consistently every year. It got worse. Now, it's also true that the total number of people surveyed in those years increased. So in 2017, it was 80 countries. In 2021, it was 112 countries. So I did the reverse calculation, which is, let's see how far from the bottom each country is. And so the smaller the number, the worse we are. So in 2017, Thailand was 27, 18 it was 24, 2019 it was 26, and then 2020 it was 11, which is pretty bad, and 2021 it's 12, which is
From the
even worse.
bottom.
From the bottom. From the bottom. Indonesia, Lala. In 2017 it was 39, class 39.
From the bottom.
And then now in 2021 it's 80.
Well, that's pretty good.
So it's dropped. But actually not that much, because when you look at the bottom calculations, it was minus 41 in 2017, minus 37 in 2018, minus 39 in 2019, minus 26 in 2020, and minus 32 in 2021. So it's actually pretty stable in its position from the bottom of the scale, right? But it ain't doing well. It went from 39 to 80 over 5 years. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, over 5 years. 39 to 80. So Indonesia is not doing great. Thailand is not doing great. Went from 53 to 100. Cambodia went from 77 to 97, but did better than Thailand. The Thais will not like this. Vietnam went from 34 to 66. Okay,
Oh,
so it dropped minus 56. Malaysia is stable, 13, 22 to 28. It's pretty stable. Myanmar went from 82 to 93, so it's pretty stable, just miserably low, but still better than Thailand. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it? So the big movers are Indonesia, which went from 39 to 80.
Yep.
you mean going down?
Down.
Going down, yeah.
I mean getting
This,
worse.
yes.
Yep.
So Thailand from 53 to 100, my God. I mean, when you think of all the money we're spending on teaching English in these countries.
Yeah, these are the things we need to discuss. I mean, I have read my students' work, and they were saying money was spent on updating textbooks. There are
Right.
trends for those
When you look
textbooks.
at Cambodia went from 77 to 97. I mean, I know the total number has grown, but what happens is that most of the bad numbers are at the bottom of the scale, or should be, because they're smaller countries and they're less proficient in English. And so you would expect those countries, like, the big countries. I mean, Singapore hasn't moved, right? Singapore's stable. Philippines is stable. But other countries have gone down the drain. And so that's a real problem. We can argue about how accurate the scale is, but I bet you that there's a drop everywhere.
And now with COVID, people were not traveling. You got 2
Mm.
years of not traveling, and who knows what's going to happen next. So I think that the reliance on expertise and on technology will increase. I think because that's the only way. I think textbooks alone will not do the job. But that's a discussion for another time.
Yes.
My dear guests, are you happy with me to close now?
Sure.
Yes, I think so.
All right. So I want to thank you very much.
We've had two people join us today, Susie and Dan Von Peng.
A lot of people will watch it, and increasingly will become.
And hopefully.
Yes, and we will also produce book chapters from these sessions, which will be very interesting for everyone.
Yes.
So we've got pretty good list of guests lined up. I cannot actually reveal everything before the session happens. We have to plan a little bit. But yeah, thank you very much for everyone who either put up with us for these 2 hours or watched us later on. Thank you so much. And we will be here in 2 weeks, and then again in 2 weeks, and then again in 2 weeks. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.